Hi, this is Jeff Halper from ICAHD, speaking from Jerusalem. I'm speaking the day after the this what we witnessed yesterday at the White House. This shameful and cynical performance by Trump and Netanyahu, in which they presented a so-called 21-point plan to end the war, actually the genocide, it isn't really a war,
Mm.
in Gaza, and to bring peace to the Middle East. What we witnessed was nothing less than a neo-colonial transactional deal. The kind of in microcosm, the way the whole world is being structured and run by Trump, by neoliberal capitalism, in this neo-colonial world that we're on. It was on display in the White House. The ignorance. There's no history in this transactional world. There's no justice. No human rights, international law are ridiculous things. They're not even a part of policy. There's no values. It's all just deals, right? Deals for money, deals for control, so you can display your ostentatious wealth. And that's it, an absolutely empty world that crushes everything in its way because it's not even a deal. Trump talks about the art of the deal. The Palestinians weren't a side to this. The Palestinians were never consulted. When Hamas was asked for its reaction to this deal that Trump and Netanyahu presented, they said we never were presented with it. It kind of went through the Arab states and Muslim states, Kuwait, not Kuwait, the Qatar, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia. It never got to Hamas. It never got to the Palestinians, certainly not the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians are not a side to this. There's no deal. They're not to be negotiated with. They're not even to be consulted. What we saw yesterday was an ultimatum. It was not a deal or anything like that. And the Palestinians in general, and this is something we have to see in this whole process, have been treated as simply a bunch of people in the way. They are not a part of this whole process. And you know what? It's like the hundreds of thousands of people that were displaced, when Trump was building his Trump Towers or his different casinos. There were deals. There was an art of the deal. But the deals were made between rich people, landlords, banks, real estate developers, so-called, contractors. The tenants themselves, especially the poor tenants, were never consulted. They had no rights. They were simply pushed aside. And that's what we witnessed yesterday with the Palestinians. So this has to be not only condemned what happened yesterday, this really has to be a warning to us about what's in store for the Palestinians, but beyond that, really what's in store for all of us in the world, because these are the people running our world. What we witnessed yesterday at the White House was also a display of the degree to which Israel dictates American policy. Now, it's not really policy. I don't think there's ever been an American policy towards certainly towards the Palestinians, but towards Israel. It's simply support for Israel in an uncritical kind of a way, and that was certainly on display yesterday. And we saw the degree to which the Palestinians don't matter at all, not to Trump, but maybe more alarmingly, not surprisingly, unfortunately, to the entire Arab and Muslim regimes. I'm not talking about the peoples who passionately support the Palestinian struggle and their own struggles. They're one and the same thing to some degree, but certainly the regimes of the Arab and Muslim world just don't care about the Palestinians. What we witnessed yesterday was nothing less than a con job. It was a setup. If Hamas doesn't agree, right, and the whole Palestinian struggle end, because that's what, and I'll talk about it in a second, that's what's built into this reform of the Palestinian Authority. Unless Hamas agrees to this so-called deal and the Palestinian struggle as a whole ends, Israel is legitimized. Israel has the full backing of the United States and presumably the Arab world to reassert itself militarily, to suppress militarily the Palestinian struggle to the point of genocide. This is what We were shown yesterday an Israeli dictated unconditional surrender, which is a term that Trump has used in the past, not only towards Hamas, but to the whole Palestinian struggle for self-determination. So what do these 21 points include? I'm not going to go over all the 21, but the main part of it, if Israel and Hamas agree to the proposal, and it's not a proposal that was presented to Hamas, but if they agree to the proposal, the war will immediately end, with the IDF halting all operations and gradually withdrawing from the Strip. That's what's written. Well, what does it mean, withdrawing from the Strip? It says that the IDF will gradually hand over territory it currently occupies. When? The next point is within 48 hours of Israel publicly accepting this deal, not Hamas, of Israel accepting the deal, all the hostages are released. The living and deceased hostages, or as Trump would say, our hostages are returned, released, the living ones and the bodies of the deceased returned. Well, this for what? I mean, I don't agree with bargaining with lives whatsoever, but in this context, in the way this is developed, Hamas is expected simply to turn over its only card in terms of negotiations, even for what? For what? The IDF does not withdraw from the West Bank. There's a redeployment to certain lines. There's a buffer zone that remains all the way around Gaza, but Israel retains freedom of action. And if Hamas does not agree, and so this is a threat, this whole 21-point plan, it's not really a plan, it's a threat. Trump told Netanyahu, if Hamas does not agree, Israel will have the full backing of the United States to finish the job. Do whatever you have to do. So here Hamas, in this deal that it wasn't a part of, is expected to hand over all the hostages in return for what? For nothing. For some in the future, maybe withdrawal, but actually a redeployment. And of course, based on what? On what kind of a trust? There was an agreement to return the hostages a year and a half ago that Israel signed, and Israel and the United States broke it, and went into all this Witkoff weird kind of a stuff, and the hostages are still there. So Hamas has no reason whatsoever to trust any word that Israel or the United States has any kind of a guarantee. So it's really not a deal at all. It really is an unconditional surrender. Now, once the hostages are returned, there were negotiations for months over how many Palestinian political prisoners will be freed, from Israeli prisons, where about 10,000 are being held. Well, they got into an equation. For each Israeli hostage returned, a certain amount of Palestinian political prisoners will be returned, to Palestine, and depending on security prisoners and how long they've served and all kinds of. Well, now this is all reduced to Israel's going to free 250 Palestinian security prisoners serving life sentences. That's it. And then 1,000 Gazans that have been arrested since the start of the war. Why 1,000? Close to 10,000 have actually been arrested, are in prison. So this whole complex negotiations that took place a year and a half ago that ended up in this hostage deal, and we saw the first stage of it happened, is completely thrown out. And instead of the hostages, actually the Palestinian hostages, the Palestinian security prisoners, the political prisoners held in Israeli prisons, instead of that agreed upon large number being released, we're talking about a much smaller number, about 250. So even that completely rewrites the agreement and throws out everything that was before without the participation of Hamas or the Palestinians. And in the 21 points, Gaza will be administered afterwards by a temporary transitional government of Palestinian technocrats. In the meantime, what's going to the body that's going to administer Gaza is going to be a board of peace headed by Trump, and de facto probably headed by Tony Blair. Until when is this temporary board of peace going to rule Gaza? Until the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. Well, what does that mean? I mean, it could use some reform. There's been no elections. Abu Mazen is absolutely corrupt. It's a corrupt regime. It represents no one. It's a subcontractor to Israel. But what does that mean? That's not what's going to be reformed, though. Netanyahu was very clear from the podium in the White House. Reform means that that the Palestinians basically stop their struggle against Israel. They don't go to the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. They don't use any instruments of international law or human rights in their defense. They recognize Israel as a Jewish state. They stop their campaigns against Israel, which means campaigns against settlements and so on. And on. He mentioned a few other things as well. So reform really means, again, unconditional surrender, not only of Hamas, but of the entire Palestinian struggle for liberation, right? And then, and this is point 20, only then, after all, the unconditional surrender is achieved to the maximum, only then, and I'm quoting here, the conditions may be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian statehood. In other words, the whole demand that these Arab regimes and the Muslim regimes, especially the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, are making, that there has to be some credible pathway to some future Palestinian state that we know is never going to happen because there is no Palestinian statehood in the cards. There is no two-state solution. We know that. It's simply a sort of a cover. It gives them a cover so they can sell this plan and the Abraham Accords to their own peoples. So this really is an ultimatum to Hamas: either surrender unconditionally, give back the hostages for nothing, or we will allow Israel to finish the job. There's nothing new in this. What really, again, amazes me is how the Arab and Muslim states collaborated in this. I mean, this really has to send up some red lights in terms of some warning lights in terms of how we're approaching this. For some reason, we are not pressuring them as much as we pressure Europe, for example, or the United States or other actors. So how Hamas responds? Now, Hamas's initial response was, we never saw this, so we can't really respond. But how Hamas responds is really irrelevant in this whole thing. They know, we all know Hamas cannot accept this. They can't accept it. The Hamas itself says no Palestinian was consulted in this. It's this so-called plan is close to the vision of Israel. It's really dictated by Israel. And Hamas says it's a recipe for aggression against Palestinians, which it certainly is. So if they respond and say yes, it is unconditional surrender. And if they say no, then Israel continues with the genocide. It doesn't really matter because Israel has actually completed what it wanted to do, which is to pacify Gaza, to destroy the last vestiges of any Palestinian resistance to Israeli colonization. It really shows in a way how irrelevant Gaza is to what Trump called yesterday part of the bigger picture of peace in the Middle East. Trump doesn't care about Gaza. Certainly Netanyahu and Israel don't care about Gaza. Its importance was to break Palestinian resistance. Once that's been done, Israel really doesn't care, what happens to it. So I know this is going on, but it's important to kind of get this background, I think, if I'm articulating it well. overall, we have to keep our eye on the prize, which is the Palestinian struggle, and not let it get lost in all these other things like a big peace in the Middle East and Abraham Accords and all of that. There are four separate but connected political processes happening today. One is this whole thing with Gaza, the 21-point plan that deals with Gaza, but it's sold as a pathway to peace. Okay. The second are the Abraham Accords that we can't ignore, that are coming down the pipeline. This is really the big prize. If Saudi Arabia can be brought into the Abraham Accords and complete it, maybe even to some degree Syria and Lebanon as well, together with the Gulf states and the other Sunni Arab states, then not only is Israel normalized, but its whole the apartheid regime of settlements is legitimized. Normalization. This is which is the heart of the Abraham Accords, is the way settler colonialism wins. Normalization takes all the facts on the ground, and it's not a negotiation, and those facts on the ground are then normalized. And the third process that's going on that's related to this is Trump's vision for peace. Look it up, and you'll see Trump presented a map in 2020 exactly of what his vision for peace in terms of Israel and Palestine are. And if you look at his map, there is annexation. He's saying we're not going to allow annexation. It doesn't matter if it's formally annexed or not. The point is, in Trump's vision for peace plan, part of his deal of the century of a few years ago, in this kind of a concept, all the Israeli settlements remain. This was, we saw in the first round, East Jerusalem was recognized as part of Israel. The American embassy was moved here. The Golan Heights were annexed as well. So it doesn't matter if it's annexation or not. The point is that in Trump's vision for peace, all the settlements remain, and Palestinians are then confined to small enclaves on maybe 15% of their country, right? So those are two very important things that are coming together. And the fourth, of course, is this whole international recognition of a Palestinian state, which is simply ridiculous. It's a nice moral support for Palestinians, but we all know there is no Palestinian state. And in fact, the Palestinian state is not defined at all in what this UN meeting called its New York Declaration. So the point is that that all these four processes, Gaza, the Abraham Accords, Trump's vision for peace, and the international recognition of a Palestinian state, are really all defined, almost dictated by Israeli interests and by Israeli facts on the ground, right? Not by negotiations. Palestinians are not a part of this process. And of the four, only two are real. We have to keep our eyes focused on those two. And that is the Abraham Accords, right? And Trump Netanyahu's two-state apartheid. We have to call the two-state solution, or Trump's vision for peace, or whatever, with the settlements, two-state apartheid, because that's what it is. So that's what we encountered yesterday. That's the reality we face in a transactional world, again, in which we, the people that support the Palestinian struggle, the Palestinians themselves, have very little leverage. They're really not at the table with the big boys. They're the tenants in Manhattan or New Jersey who are being displaced for Trump Towers or a casino. And we have to find a way to assert our popular support for the Palestinians, but in general, our concern for a just world, somehow into this transactional political process that locks us out as well. We need to challenge this cynical, unjust, transactional way of running the world that leaves us all out. And we have to take charge of the discussion as well. We can't allow Trump and Netanyahu and the other countries of the world, actually, the governments, to frame the Palestinian struggle as simply a fight against terrorism. That's what's happened. Hamas has the whole Palestinian struggle has been reduced to Hamas, and Hamas has been reduced to terrorism. And that's the framing that makes sense to people. But it's again, it's an oppressive framing that denies Palestinian rights and in fact erases them completely. We have to replace that. We, those that support the Palestinians, and especially us academics, Palestinian and not Palestinian, who have an analysis, who know the history, who have the concepts, we can help to reframe this in terms of what it really is, which is a just Palestinian anti-colonial struggle for self-determination and liberation. That's what it is, and then we have to unpack that for people and let them know what that means in the context on the other side of Zionist Israeli settler colonialism. That's not just a term, that really means something, and we have to unpack that for people as well. So an anti-colonial struggle against Zionist Israeli settler colonialism. That's the struggle that we're engaged in. I'm going to do a series, I think, on this. I think it has to be laid out. I've written books. Other people have written excellent books as well on this, but it stays within the academic realm. I don't know how many people are reading books these days, unfortunately. So I'm going to do a series that lays out Zionism's settler colonial enterprise, its logic, its structure, its process, its goals, which is to Judaize Palestine, which is an important term that we very seldom use, leading to normalization, which is another key term that we seldom use. And I invite other academics to either join with me or do your own series. We have to have a major reframing campaign if we want to begin to let the people of the world understand what's really happening. So when they watch what happened yesterday, the peoples of the world themselves, even though people feel that this is a con job, that the people know why, and that we can then begin to offer alternatives. So that's my thoughts for the day. Instead of writing it down, I thought I'd say it. But I think this is a tremendously revealing moment, and it's something that we have to seize on and really think about and organize around. Thanks for listening to me for the struggle of free Palestine and free all of us. Bye.